Hi, everybody, and welcome to Teaching Tip Tuesday, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning here at UWSP. This week, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we can use routine assessment of learning outcomes in our courses to build stronger courses. This is a part of course design that should be routinely employed. I know that a lot of instructors view assessment as kind of a dirty word, but I think that it's one of the most important tools in our toolkit to help improve student learning, and it's an important part of good course design. By routinely assessing student achievement of learning outcomes, we can make sure that courses are working the way that we want them to, and that students are learning what we want the students to learn. This allows us to identify and change problem areas, therefore improving the learning environment for students. There are a variety of assessment instruments or tools that you can use to assess student achievement of learning outcomes in your course. It's important that you choose your tool carefully so that it aligns with the learning outcome and ensures good assessment. It's also important that you target the assessment so that you're evaluating student achievement of each learning outcome separately. So, how might you do this? If your assessment instrument is an exam, you might want to look at the students' scores on particular sets of questions that are tied to each of your learning outcomes so that you can evaluate their achievement with regard to each of those outcomes. If your assessment instrument is an assignment like a paper or a project, you can employ a rubric with separate criteria for mastery of each of the assessed learning outcomes. I think it's really important to stress that grading isn't the same as assessment. Grading gives us good information about overall student performance in a course, but not about achievement of specific learning outcomes. Remember that grades don't give us that targeted data that we're looking for. Multiple learning outcomes are covered simultaneously, so a C in a course might mean complete mastery of half of the learning outcomes and complete failure at the other half. There's no real way to tell. Also, grades include all sorts of scores for student activities that may be tied to achievement of learning outcomes, but don't in themselves indicate student achievement. So, it's important to collect objective assessment data that is separate from the grades on assignments or the grade in the course. To see how routine assessment can help you, you need to consider the assessment cycle and how it affects course design. In good course design, you begin by specifying the learning outcomes you want your students to meet. Then you determine what assessments will best allow you to evaluate how well the students have achieved those outcomes. The rest of your course design should support student progress toward those outcomes. After the course is designed, you teach it and collect relevant data on student achievement of the learning outcomes. Remember that assessments must be targeted, and you should have objective data on how many students in the course have exceeded the expectations associated with the learning outcome, met the expectations, partially met the expectations, or failed to meet the expectations for each learning outcome. So here's where things really become useful. Your assessment data can reveal all sorts of patterns that aren't visible from just looking at grades. You can compare the distribution of students exceeding, meeting, partially meeting, and not meeting particular learning outcomes to a benchmark, a level of achievement that you'd like to see. Or you can use your first round of assessment as the benchmark to beat. The targeted assessment data will allow you to better see what students are learning in your course than grades alone will. Based on your analysis, you can make changes in your course that will improve the achievement of learning outcomes. We call this closing the loop, and there are a lot of things you can do to close the loop. If you're meeting your benchmarks, you may just reinforce the aspects of the course that are working well. But if your students aren't achieving at the level that you expect, you may determine that you simply haven't provided the appropriate content to allow them to do so. In that case, you may revise the instruction to give more focus on particular content. Or you may determine that you didn't provide enough scaffolding of assignments, or that the assignments themselves didn't provide a sufficient amount of practice or opportunity for your students to receive constructive feedback, so you may need to revise the assignments. You might determine that the assessment itself wasn't appropriate for measuring the learning outcome, in which case this may need modification or replacement. Your results may indicate that the learning outcome you specified is beyond the capability of the students at the level of your course, or that it's below the level of your course and not appropriately challenging, in which case these may need revision. Finally, you may be relying on prior knowledge that you expected students to acquire in previous courses. If they didn't, curricular revision of some type may be in order. The important thing is that you use your assessment data to make targeted changes in your course. This will lead to improvement in both student achievement of learning outcomes and in your teaching. By shifting the focus of your analysis away from grades to the patterns of student achievement of specific learning outcomes, you'll be better able to see what it is they're actually learning. Remember that routine assessment is the first step in making targeted improvements in courses that will facilitate student achievement. That's this week's teaching tip, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning here at UWSP. Remember that we at CITL are here to provide support in course design, learning activities, assessment, and pedagogy. Schedule an appointment with our staff using our website today.